What's going on, bibliophiles? We are back today with another fantastic poem. Today we are going to be reading Robert Hayden's Those Winter Sundays, a beautiful poem about regret and appreciation. Let's go ahead and crack into the reading here. Those Winter Sundays by Robert Hayden. Sundays too, my father got up early and put his clothes on in the blue-black cold. Then, with cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday weather, made banked fires blaze. No one ever thanked him. I'd wake and hear the cold splintering, breaking. When the rooms were warm, he'd call, and slowly I would rise and dress, fearing the chronic angers of that house, speaking indifferently to him who had driven out the cold and polished my good shoes as well. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? Let's do our line-by-line analysis. Already in the first line, we have a lot of information about the speaker and, in this case, his father. The speaker begins, Sundays too, my father got up early. So, in particular, what I would home in on is the word to here. Sundays too, which is to say my father also got up early on Sundays, which is the last day of the week. So he's gotten up early every day of the week, which tells us a bit about the speaker's father. He's somebody who is, we already know, disciplined, and apparently, as we'll learn as we read along, that he is very dedicated to his family. Sundays too, my father got up early and put his clothes on in the blue-black cold. What I would have us focus on here is the image, which is beautiful. The imagery in this poem is simple, austere, but nonetheless incredible. Blue-black cold. What I imagine in my mind is that point of the dawn, which is just between daybreak and dusk, if you will, and where the sky takes on this almost bruised tinge, this bruised hue, if you will. Blue-black cold. Amazing juxtaposition here. The speaker continues on, then with cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday weather, made banked fires blaze. There's a lot of information here, and we can make inferences about the speaker's father based on what the speaker chooses to focus on in his descriptions. So he says specifically that the father has cracked hands which ache from his labor. Now, what can we assume? We can assume that his father is a manual laborer of some kind. We don't get enough details in the poem to make any inferences about the specific kind of labor that he does, but we know generally it must be manual labor because his hands are cracked. He's doing something quite literally with his hands, right? Now, despite that, despite having cracked hands which ache, this is also suggesting that he is potentially arthritic as a consequence of his manual labor. That's why his hands ache in the cold. Now, despite this, despite the fact that he is taking time to get up on Sunday as well, in addition to all of the other days of the week, when presumably most people would likely have that day off at the very least, his father gets up and he makes a fire for the home. It says here, made banked fires blaze. Now, why is the father doing this? Presumably because he wants his family to be warm when they wake up. But we have that image of the father very starkly contrasted with this last line in this first stanza. The speaker says, no one ever thanked him. So there's this juxtaposition between the father, who appears to be a man of discipline and sacrifice, and then we have this image of his family being someone who is ungracious, who isn't thankful for these small little sacrifices that he makes in order to make his family comfortable. And this becomes more and more clear in the second stanza. The speaker continues, I'd wake and hear the cold splintering, breaking. This is some beautiful imagery here in this line. The speaker says that the cold is splintering and breaking. I find this to be beautiful because I don't think of cold as having the capacity to splinter, right? The weather doesn't have the capacity to splinter. But I think we know what the speaker means imagistically. It seems to be a reference to either ice as it gets warmer and it kind of cracks and you see the spidery lines kind of breaking through it. Or it could also be a reference to the sound of the logs in the fire kind of breaking as they are catching a flame, right? You can hear them almost splintering as they get more and more hot. The speaker continues, when the rooms were warm, he'd call. This is a small detail, but it tells us a lot about the speaker's father. When the rooms were warm, he'd call, which is to say that the father actually waits for the fire to warm up the house enough before he calls his children in, presumably to have breakfast or get ready to leave. Now, he could have just as easily, if he were less considerate, he could have just not made the fire in the first place, or he could have made the fire and immediately called his children. But we know he's generous and caring, albeit in a austere way, because he waits for the house to get warm. The speaker continues, and slowly I would rise and dress, fearing the chronic angers of that house. So as the presumably boy rises and gets dressed, he does so slowly because, as he says here, he fears the chronic angers of that house. Now, here we are left to speculate to a certain degree. We don't know exactly what it is about that house that is chronically angry. But I will say from the details given previously, my best guess is that the chronic anger comes from the father. And it likely comes from the father because he's somebody who has had to live a life of abnegation. In all likelihood, he's had to deny his own self, his own desires as a human being in order to sacrifice for his family. And as a consequence of that, as a consequence of bottling up his true or authentic self, if you will, he has become angry, and he perhaps takes that out on his family. We might also infer that the chronic anger comes from not being appreciated. As is said in the first stanza, the speaker says, no one ever thanked him. So not only is he sacrificing all of this so that he can create a comfortable, fulfilling life for his children, he's doing it and he's making all those sacrifices and not being appreciated for it. Now, if there is a wife in this scenario, and we don't necessarily know, there's no reference to a wife, so we don't know if this is a single father or if there's a father and mother. We don't necessarily know. But it could be the case also that as a consequence of him working so much, there might be some bitterness on the part of the wife, and there might be always kind of like tension between them. And the kids, to a certain extent, might feel that, and hence describe it as a kind of chronic, consistent, habitual anger. Continuing on to the third stanza, the speaker says, speaking indifferently to him who had driven out the cold and polished my good shoes as well. So just after the speaker has already gotten up and gotten dressed, he still speaks indifferently to his father, despite the fact that he's made this fire for him so that the house is warm. And not only that, he also, as I said here, has driven out the cold and polished his good shoes as well. Once again, small little sacrifices the father makes so that the child can have the best life possible. I don't know if they're necessarily, in this case, because it is a Sunday, if they're going to go to church or if he has some sort of school. I don't necessarily know what the situation is, and there's no reference made to it, but we know that the father is willing to make this small little sacrifice so that his child looks and represents himself as best as possible. And the last line here ends with a note. Maybe it's better to speak of it. It ends loudly, if you will, with regret. It rings with regret. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? It's posed as a question, but the question is, I would say, rhetorical. The speaker is not genuinely asking here, What did I know about love's austere and lonely offices? The speaker is actually making a statement, which is that I didn't know anything about love's austere and lonely offices. I didn't know anything about the severe duties that you have to do in order to be a good father to your children. This poem speaks to a universal human experience. It is true for all human beings at all points in history. So long as there has been humanity, this has been true. And it's this. As children, as adolescents, we cannot, because we have such a limited understanding of ourselves and of the world, we cannot understand the suffering and misery our parents experience when they are trying as best as possible to create a life of comfort for us, their children. That being said, as we grow older and as we become more and more conscious of what it takes to make it, so to speak, in the real world, when we become more and more conscious of the small daily sacrifices you have to make for the people that you love, such as your children, we in turn express gratitude towards our parents for what they did. Because now we've achieved, through the wisdom of experience, a certain level of understanding what they had to do in order to give us the life that we had, such as it was. In my opinion, the guilt we feel towards the way that we treated our parents when we were younger is unavoidable. It's just a matter of course that in human maturation, when we are younger and we have such limited understanding of ourselves and the world, that we will mistreat our parents because of that. And as we grow older, we will become more and more wise and hopefully express gratitude towards them. But despite my saying that, human beings will, at all periods of time and history, continue to feel guilt for the way that they treated their parents. I'll go ahead and leave it there. You guys tell me what you think about this poem and my analysis down in the comments below. Otherwise, if you enjoyed this content, hit that like button, smash subscribe, hit the notification bell so you can be informed when I drop more videos on poetry and prejudice. Until next time, Bibliophiles.